Hi students, we are going to continue in chapter 4, lesson 2, colonial government. And we are going back to using the textbook, and I will read the information that we need and then we'll answer the questions. So we're looking under English principles of government and what two principles greatly influence the development of the United States. When English colonists came to North America, they brought with them English ideas about government. These ideas have been developing in England over hundreds of years. By the 1600s, the English people had won political liberties, such as trial by jury, that were largely unknown elsewhere. At the heart of the English system were two principles of government: protected rights and representative legislatures. These two principles greatly influenced the development of the United States and are important parts of the U.S. Constitution. So our two principles, they specifically said protected rights and representative legislatures, these two principles. So that's what our answer is going to be over here on our notes: protected rights and representative legislature. Our next heading is protected rights. And what did colonists believe about protected rights? So we're going to read under protected rights. The colonists believed that government must respect civil liberties or rights. In fact, the protection of people's rights was a certain idea in the English system of government. It first appeared in the Magna Carta, or Great Charter, which King John signed on June 15, 1215. This document gave English people protection against unjust treatment or punishment. For the English, even kings and queens were bound by this law. So what did colonists believe about protected rights? They believed that they must respect civil liberties. And when we say they, we mean government. Here we go. Government must protect civil liberties. And so that's our answer over here. And civil liberties are rights. So make sure that you include that in there. And I will remind you again that everything that I have on the notes is also what you should have on the notes, because I will come back to ask you these questions later on assignments. And if you don't have all the information, then you're going to have to go back and watch the lesson again. Our next heading is representative government. I'm still going to pause a moment while you're writing in that answer, but I'm going to move on to the next page in the textbook. So I will get ready for that part. Okay, under representative government, we are going to define representative government. And remember that many times in text, they highlight vocabulary terms. Not every single one, but many times they do. And you will see that we have representative government highlighted over here. However, I am still going to read the information that we need. So the English had a tradition of representative government in which people elect delegates to make laws and conduct government. The English Parliament was a representative assembly. It had the power to legislate or make laws. So we're going to pause there because that gives us our answer to number 1. And I'm also going to give you the answer to number 2, and then we'll continue on from there. So our representative government here is highlighted, and it is where people, where people elect delegates to make laws and conduct the government. And so delegate is a word for representatives, and that's actually the word that we're going to use here in our answer, is that people elect representatives to make the laws and conduct government. So that should be pretty easy to understand because the word representative can be right there in the answer. So we have people who represent us. We elect these people to make the decisions for our country. Now, number 2 is asking what is Parliament, because it references Parliament here. The English Parliament was a representative assembly. And we're going to see this term Parliament quite often in our information in this chapter and actually moving forward, especially when we're talking about England or Great Britain, which is the same place. And we'll talk more about that later too. So Parliament is the government of England or Great Britain? And I'll give you a moment to make sure that you have that information written before we move forward. Okay, and so our next question is still coming from representative government here. So I am going to continue to be on this page here for the next question, but I'm going to switch here. And our question is, what was the Glorious Revolution? So Parliament had, we are going to look for our next answer in this next paragraph. In the mid-1600s, Parliament and King James II began a struggle for power. In 1688, Parliament removed King James II from power and crowned William and Mary as the new rulers. William and Mary promised to govern England according to the statutes, which are laws, in Parliament agreed upon, and the laws and customs of the same. The English called this peaceful transfer of power the Glorious Revolution. It brought a major change in the idea of government in England. From that time forward, no ruler would have more power than the legislature. So we're looking for the Glorious Revolution. And here they use that term, Glorious Revolution. Here we are. Okay. And so first of all, one thing that you should know is that the word revolution means great change. So we are actually going to add that in here. A little smaller. There we go. So a revolution is a great change. And so what was the great change that took place? Well, we had a peaceful transfer of power. And so what they did was they removed King James II from the throne, and they brought in a new king and queen to rule England. So they had this struggle over power. The Parliament removed King James from the throne and replaced with King William and Queen Mary. And this took place in 1688. Okay, and I want to also add in here too that this was a peaceful transfer of power. So there was no war that took place for this to happen. Sometimes we need to have drastic measures. Sometimes we need to use drastic measures in order to have a great change, in order to have a revolution. And we are actually going to talk about that when we get to what's called the Revolutionary War. So that is a drastic measure. So we are having this great change take place, but it's being done peacefully. And so it just depends. It depends on the situation, depends on what it is that's taking place. So number 4, how did the Glorious Revolution change ideas about the government? Let's see here. It talked about this right here, this major change in the idea of government in England. But what was it? We're going to continue down to the rest of that no ruler would have more power than the legislature. And remember that the legislature are the group of representatives. They are the people who are making decisions for the country. In some cases for the colony, it depends on what we're talking about. Here we're talking about the country of England. And so they do have this elected legislature. But remember, in a monarchy, the king still had the final say. But because of this change, that no longer was going to happen. It showed that the elected representatives will now have power over their ruler. So it was no longer the type of monarchy that their king or queen could just make all of the decisions and no one could question it. There was sort of a chain of command now that it had to go through. It had to be approved by this group of people, by these representatives in a legislature. I'm going to give you a moment so that you can put that information in. And we are going to move forward into the English Bill of Rights. And our question is, what was the English Bill of Rights? So we will read. To set clear limits on a ruler's powers, Parliament drew up the English Bill of Rights in 1689. The Bill of Rights stated that the ruler could not suspend Parliament's laws, impose taxes, or raise an army without Parliament's consent. Members of Parliament had to be freely elected. Citizens of England had the right to a fair trial by jury in court cases, and the Bill of Rights also banned cruel and unusual punishments. Okay, so we have a few different things that we're including here in our answer. And the first part is just the general answer on what was the Bill of Rights. And so here we go. It says the Parliament drew up the Bill of Rights in 1689. So this is a document. That's what that means, to draw it up. So this was a document signed in 1689. And this guaranteed certain rights to all citizens. That part's not listed in the text there for us. So that's why it's in red with that little asterisk symbol. Okay, so signed in 1689, guaranteeing certain rights to all citizens. So we're going to kind of complete these sentences here. Without approval from Parliament, the ruler could not do certain things. And it specifically lists out these few things here in the text. So the ruler could not suspend Parliament laws, impose taxes, or raise an army without Parliament's consent. So consent means their approval. So that's how I started this sentence. Without approval from Parliament, ruler could not suspend Parliament's laws, which to suspend means to take away. So they can't take away those Parliament's laws. They cannot raise taxes, and they cannot raise an army. That means to create an army. And those are things that kings did since the beginning of time in England. They raised taxes whenever they wanted to. They made laws or changed laws or got rid of laws whenever they wanted to. And they are the ones who commanded, created, and directed the armies. And so those are things now that were not able to be done unless Parliament, remember that's their government, the legislature, the representatives, unless they agreed to it. In addition to that, citizens were given the right to certain things. And there's more to this document than what we're putting here, but these are the major highlights that we want to focus on. And so citizens of England had the right to a fair jury in court cases, and it banned cruel and unusual punishments. So they were given the right to trial by jury and no cruel and unusual punishments. I want to add in here too that this, let me make this smaller here, so hopefully it can fit in here. This document inspired the United States Bill of Rights. change this color here just to note that it's not in the text. So we're going to, there we go, make it red. Okay, there we are. So this inspired the United States Bill of Rights that will be established in 1791. So we're talking almost 100 years after this, well, a little more than 100 years after this, actually 1791 to 1689, that they will create the United States Bill of Rights, and they are going to have some of this information in there, like a trial by jury and no cruel and unusual punishments. We will talk about that when we learn about the Bill of Rights. So next we have the government in America. I'm going to still leave this page here for a moment in case you are still typing that information. This one had a lot of stuff, so I'm going to leave it a little bit longer before we move on. Okay, so our next topic or title is called Government in America, and we are looking for who is not given these rights. So one thing that we need to include in here first that I kind of left out of this information is that only white male property owners could vote. So we're going to put that information right there. And who is not given these rights, I also want to have you include in there that this means that they have no voice in government. You should have a little bit more space. Your boxes can be manipulated a little bit better than mine can here in this type of document. Okay, so who is not given these rights is what we're looking for. And what that means is who is not given a voice in government, talking about the right to vote. So we're going to read under Government in America. We are going to move ahead a couple paragraphs because I did not ask questions about some of this information. So I'm going to go to the paragraph that does have the information that we're looking for. You hopefully should have written in here, Government in America, that only white male property owners could vote. And then we're looking for who is not given these rights. So I'm going to read to find our answer. Not all colonists had a voice in government. In general, only white men who owned property could vote. Most women, indentured servants, landless poor, and African Americans could not vote. Still, compared to Europe, the share of the colonial population taking part in government was large. This training proved valuable when the colonies became independent. So remember, only white male property owners could vote. That basically means that then everybody else cannot. But we are going to specifically list out these major other groups that we're talking about here. So we have women, indentured servants, landless poor, and African Americans could not vote. These are all people that really were not even seen as citizens. And so they were not given that right to vote. And of course, African Americans were seen as property. So that one really is a reason why they would not have been given the right to vote. And so remember again that means that they have no voice in government. I am going to move down here as you are writing that answer in, and we are jumping to our next title, which is English Economic Policies. And we're looking for the definition of mercantilism, which once again we've got highlighted here, but I'm going to read this information. Beginning in the 1600s, many European nations followed the theory known as mercantilism. Mercantilism holds that a country builds wealth and power by building its supply of gold and silver. To achieve this goal, the country must export or sell to other countries more than its imports or buys from other countries. A country must also seek colonies which could supply raw materials and serve as a market for exports. So we're actually going to get a few answers from that information there. And mercantilism here, this is what mercantilism is, that a country builds wealth and power. Oops, we can't see quite all of that. Hold on, let me fix this a little bit. There we go. Theory stating that country builds wealth and power by building up its supply of gold and silver. So gold and silver is what gives any country wealth. And that's what every country wants to do, is build up their gold and silver. And the way they do that is by exporting to other countries. And then that means that they're basically taking the gold from the other countries, because the other countries have to purchase those exports. So we're going to define exports, and exports is a term that you should know from 7th grade that you talked about, hopefully. And these are when goods are sold out of a country, or they exit a country, right? That EX. So we're sending goods out of the country to trade. And so then the opposite of that is import. We're bringing them into a country, which means that we are buying them from other countries. So we want to sell more than we buy so that we can build up that supply of gold and silver. And that's what makes our wealth in a country. I'll pause there and let you write that information. So I want to quickly reference this last sentence here that says a country must also seek colonies which could supply raw materials and serve as a market for exports. So raw materials is something that you need to know what that means in order to answer this following question. And raw materials are basically goods that are found in nature. So nothing has been done to them yet. And so you can pause for, you can wait a minute before you write that in here. I also have another part that you're going to add in that's not in the textbook. So I will start with that. They see the American colonies as an economic resource. And the reason why they see it as an economic resource is going to come from our next paragraph here. So actually, I'll let you type that in as I begin reading this paragraph. The English followed a mercantilist policy. They looked to the American colonies for raw materials such as tobacco, rice, and indigo, wheat, lumber, fur, leather, fish, and whale products. They also wanted the colonists to buy English manufactured goods such as tools, clothing, and furniture. So again, these are some examples of raw materials: tobacco, rice, indigo, wheat, lumber, fur, leather, fish. So those are all things that we find in nature, and we have not done anything to them, but we can. There are things that can be done with them. So they want the colonies to provide England with raw materials. Now, I'm only giving one example of a raw material here, but you've got all of these examples, okay? So that raw material is lumber, a good found in nature. It's just something natural at this point, okay? And then the English manufacturers, well, what does a manufacturer do? They make something, right? They are going to produce something, and they're going to use those raw materials. And so what's a product that could be made with lumber? And remember, lumber is wood, right? So there are actually endless possibilities that we could list out here. We are going to list out an example. So English manufacturers then create finished goods. They manufacture them. They create them from that raw material. So this particular example, lumber, they could make ships. They could make furniture. They can build houses. They can build wagons. We can go on and on and on for the things that could be manufactured from lumber, okay? I'll give you another example here. Wheat is a raw material over here that's listed in the text. From wheat, we can make flour. We can make bread. Okay, so those are things that are going to be finished goods. Number 5, what were the Navigation Acts? We're going to continue in the next paragraph. To control this trade, England began passing a series of laws called the Navigation Acts in the 1650s. The laws forced colonists to sell their raw materials to England, even if they could get a better price elsewhere. Goods bought by the colonies from other countries in Europe had to go to England first and be taxed. All trade goods had to be carried on ships built in England or the colonies. The crews on the ships had to be English as well. So the Navigation Acts are a series of laws. We talked about this word before, acts, that it means it's a law, okay? And so this is forcing colonists to sell their raw materials only to England, even though they could get a better price elsewhere. And if they did sell it elsewhere, they had to still go through England first and then be taxed there. So they were sort of creating a monopoly, if you will, which is something that's actually illegal in today's world. They can't cut out every other company from making a certain product, because then that would mean that they could charge whatever they wanted and things would be very expensive. And so here they are saying England is the one who wants to try to build up their gold supply, right? They're trying to increase their wealth. And so they're blocking the colonies from using any other products from any other countries. And so they are only allowed to sell their raw materials to England. So I sort of already answered this next question for why were the Navigation Acts passed. And so we will flip here to our next page. And that is because they wanted to control the trade in the colonies to ensure that only England will benefit from this trade. They want to build up that gold supply. That wealth is going to give them power over other places in the world. And so all countries want to build their wealth. Our next heading is colonial resistance, and we're looking for how did colonists react to the Navigation Acts. So I will read this next paragraph. The colonists at first accepted the Navigation Acts because the laws guaranteed them a place to sell their raw materials. Later, the colonists came to resent the English restrictions. With their population growing, colonists wanted to manufacture their own goods rather than import them from England. They also wanted to sell their products to buyers other than England. Colonial merchants began smuggling or shipping goods without government permission or payment of taxes. Controls on trade would later cause conflict between the American colonies and England. And so that's something that's going to be just one of the things that will lead to a war between the American colonies and England. And that will be coming up in a couple chapters. So how did the colonists react? Well, they actually reacted in a couple different ways, because here it says at first they accepted the Navigation Acts because they had a place to sell their raw materials. And so they thought, well, hey, I always have a guaranteed place to sell my product. So I will always be guaranteed some income. I can get some money. But later, they started to resent the acts, meaning that they later decided they did not like them. They were kind of mad about that. And so what did the colonists do? They started to ignore those laws. And instead of only getting those things from England and only selling to England, they began to smuggle to other nations. And to smuggle something means that you are shipping goods without government permission or paying the taxes on them. And so they were shipping goods illegally, basically, is what that means. And doing it kind of in secret under the radar. You're hiding it places on ships so they can't, if they are inspected, they are not found, or they're reporting less of a product and not paying on it, that kind of stuff. That's what smuggling means. Okay, so that takes us to the end of lesson 2.